Okay, so welcome to another Urban Outdoorsman SoCal video. My name is Danny Milton, and today we're going to be reviewing the Canyon Spectral. If this is your first time here, some of the things that I do, I do a lot of mountain bike reviews. I review bikes, I review trails, I do kind of like how-to tutorials on those trails. I do a lot of surfing, do a lot of hiking, backpacking, also getting into photography. If you want to see some of my photography stuff, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put those links down and below in the description and also up on the screen so you can check those out as well. So if you could help out the channel, hit that like button down below, do all those other fun things, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. The company that we're talking about today is Canyon Bikes. They are a European company based out of Germany. In September of 2018, they opened their California headquarters down in Calabasas. Canyon is an online retailer. That means that if you want to purchase one of their bikes, you have to order it online and they will ship it to you. Now, the showroom that they opened in Calabasas, there's also another one north of me in Southern California. They have bikes there. They have all of their bikes there. They have a bunch of different sizes. You can demo those bikes. You can be, fitted to make sure that you purchase the right frame size, but you cannot buy an actual bike from those showrooms. Now, the one drawback of them being just an online retailer is, people are kind of worried like, well, if something goes wrong with a bike, what do I do? Well, Canyon has a bunch of different kind of tiers to their warranty. The first warranty is just a general warranty. It's 2 years. It covers pretty much most of the parts of the bike, except for the frame. There's a separate warranty for the frame. The 2 years is just general stuff, like handlebars, cranks, kind of things like that. It doesn't cover the wear items, like your chain, your cables, your brake pads. It doesn't cover stuff like that. The frame itself has a 6-year warranty, and that's going to cover you for most of the things that can go wrong with your frame. Now, in the case that you actually do break the frame while riding it, there's kind of a gray area here as far as, were you doing something that you're supposed to be doing? Like, if you're jumping off the roof of your house, that's not something the bike is made for. And people do crazy stuff like that. But if you're just riding on a regular trail and you are performing maintenance on the bike, it shouldn't be a problem getting a warranty coverage for that. The thing that they have, it's called their crash replacement program. Now, that is for 3 years. So if you crack this frame, riding it, going downhill or something like that, and it's not going to get covered by the normal warranty, it's not normal wear and damage, they will replace the frame. I'm looking at my notes. It says they will replace the frame at a greatly reduced cost. That's exactly what it says on their website. Now, I don't know what that cost is, but if they only have to replace out the frame, I'm sure they're going to give it to you at their cost price, maybe even lower, which should be a pretty good deal. So what type of bike is this, and who's it really made for? Now, according to Canyon's website, they call this a modern trail bike. And with 160 millimeters of travel up front and 150 in the rear, that's pretty much going to get you through most, up and down most trails that you can go through. For 2019, Canyon has 4 different models of this bike, ranging in price, of course, from their aluminum frame all the way up to their top-of-the-line carbon frame. The aluminum 6.0 bike starts at $28.99, and the carbon fiber 9.0 limited is priced at $7,500. And, it's basically, obviously, the cheapest bike is the aluminum bike. The biggest upgrade to the next 3 bikes is they're all carbon fiber, and then the price goes up according to your components, your shocks and your drivetrain, and I think the 2 top ones have carbon fiber wheels as well. Canyon also has 3 women's models, the first being an aluminum model, which starts at $24.99, and then they have 2 carbon fiber models, the highest being $44.99. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the geometry and the actual, specs, the components of the bike as well. The main difference between the 2018 to the 2019 models is, and it's actually, I made the mistake when I was riding this bike, is I had looked at the 2018 geometry for this bike, and obviously I was riding a 2019 bike. The biggest difference is the travel of the bike. The 2018 models only had 150 millimeters up front and 140 in the rear. For 2019, they increased by 10 millimeters. So the 2019 models have 160 millimeters of travel up front and 150 in the rear. The 2019 model was basically the same geometry as the 2018. The only thing that changed was the head tube angle. The head tube angle went from 66.5 in the 2018 model to 66 degrees in the 2019 model. Not a big difference, half a degree, but you'd be surprised how much a half a degree will change the way a bike feels. All of the other specs remain pretty much the same. The C-tube angle stayed at 74.5 degrees. The reach at 482 was exactly the same as the 2018 model, and the wheelbase at 1,235 millimeters was exactly the same as the 2018 model. The other two main components stay the same: drivetrain and brakes. You've got the SRAM GX Eagle for the drivetrain. You know, you've got the cranks, the chain, the rear derailleur, and the cassette. The brakes stay the same, the SRAM Guide Rs. Those are the 4-piston SRAM Guide Rs, and you have a 200 millimeter rotor up front and a 180 in the rear. The next thing we're going to talk about is the initial feel. Whenever I do a bike review, I'll go through, you know, the initial feel, how it felt climbing, how it felt going downhill, and then, you know, my overall consensus, how I feel about the bike. The initial feel, now that's everything is subjective. You know, it just depends on what you like. You know, are you a cross-country guy? Are you a downhill guy? Are you an enduro person? This bike is basically an enduro bike. So you want to sit down low. You want to have the handlebars, you know, out in front of you at a good distance. You don't want to be too high. You don't want to sit on top of the bike. You want to sit in the bike. That way, when you're going downhill, you don't feel like you're going to just get thrown over the front handlebars. And this is kind of it just depends on, you know, some people get really stuck on numbers like, you know, the reach has to be a certain distance, or I don't like it. You know, the cranks have to be a certain way. The seat tube has to be a certain way. You'd be surprised. I'm used to my Giant Rain. This bike is a little bit different as far as, you know, shorter reach, a little bit shorter wheelbase than I'm used to. But, you know, it's all subjective. The handlebars are 780 millimeters, which, you know, the difference between 780 and 800s, I have 800s on my bike. It's a half an inch. It's really not that big of a difference. You're not really gonna like get on and like, oh my God, you know, it's way too narrow. 780 is fine. It feels good. This bike, you know, it had the RockShox suspension on it. It felt great. You know, I did have, you know, I'm 6'3". On a good day, I'm about 230 pounds. Plus my backpack, which had, you know, my camera, my GoPro, had my drone in there. I probably got about a 30-pound backpack on. Oh my. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is how this bike felt climbing uphill. And one of the things I didn't notice, you know, when I got on the bike, because I don't look at every single little thing, is that this bike comes with 165 millimeter cranks. Now, I'm used to 175s. I want as much torque as I can get. I need that torque to get my Rain up the hills. Now, I didn't realize that this bike had 165s on it. I only noticed that when I started doing my research to do this video. That being said, I didn't notice it at all. I didn't have a single pedal strike the entire time I rode this bike. I was riding up a bunch of techie trails. You know, there's rocks up on the sides. There's rocks on the down, you know, as you're going downhill, uphill, all that stuff. No pedal strikes. I did not notice that I had to, you know, spin the cranks more or less, or I had less torque on them when climbing this bike. This bike climbed amazing. And the seat tube angle was great. The rear shock, there was no bob in the rear shock at all. It got through all of the techie stuff, you know, actually better than I normally do on my bike. And that's saying a lot because, you know, this bike had a little bit of a different feel than my bike does. And I was able to get through some of those sections, you know, crossing little streams and shooting up really steep sections, having to, you know, get around really sharp turns on a bike that you're not used to, and just doing it is says a lot about the bike. Now, Canyon has what they call triple phase suspension. And what that basically says is like the initial part of the stroke of the rear shock is very sensitive. So it's going to absorb those little tiny bumps that you're going over while you're climbing up the hills. The mid-stroke of that rear shock is going to be a little bit more stable. It's going to be more forgiving when you're going over like rock gardens and things like that. And then the top end of the stroke will ramp up very quickly. So when you do take one of those big drop-offs or off a jump like that and you land, you're not going to bottom out that shock super hard. It's going to progressively get harder and harder as you get to the end of that shock length. That being said, you know, with my size, my weight, and all the extra weight that I had in my backpack, I was able to get through this climb fairly easily on this bike. It was the first bike that I rode that day, and you know, I had a good night's sleep the night before, but that being said, this bike climbed really good. I was really surprised on how easily it was to get through all of those little switchbacks I had to do, some of the little technical sections, you know, and you have to really spin those cranks to kind of like, you know, take your momentum over some rocks. It did a really good job. And with all that weight that I had, I mean, you know, I'm a heavy guy myself, plus my backpack, there was no bob at all in the rear end, which was really surprising to me. I'm going to be riding the Spectral down a trail called Grand Central. It's a intermediate to advanced trail. It's got a lot of, you know, rock drops, some real chunky drops, some small little jumps in there, some great little rock gardens, and it's a pretty fun trail. Really good to test out a new bike on. Nothing super crazy, but not too easy as well. Oh, tree. Stupid tree. It's doing pretty good. Shock is wide open. I'm climbing through these little technical kind of rocky sections. Very little bob, but still nice and soft. This bike is pedaling really well uphill. Very little bob in the rear end. And it's got a much bigger chainring than my bike. This shock is wide open. My shock I run closed. And they're pedaling about the same up this trail. Both bikes, my bike and this bike, both have the GX drivetrain. This bike probably has a 32 tooth chainring. Yeah, very little bob. A lot of these little kind of short, steep sections where you got to really spin the wheels or spin the cranks. My bike would be bobbing. This one is staying really high in the travel, which is great. And it still has enough give to absorb all these little bumps. Now for the downhill part of this review. The trail that I did was Grand Central Trail in Sedona, Arizona. You know, I was out there for the mountain bike festival and I was able to, you know, demo this bike. This trail was a decent length trail. It was about a 6-mile round trip I took from the actual festival all the way back around to it. There was a fair amount of climbing. There is a pretty good amount of downhill as well. And there's also, if you've ever been out to Sedona, there's a lot of, you know, rock drop-offs and things like that. So one of the first things I did was there was just drop-offs. There was like our little rolling rock part, and then a small drop, and then like a kind of like a shelf drop of probably about 2.5, 3 feet. And I did that a couple of times. You look in the video, I have my camera set up on the tripod as well, videotaping me going off that. And the bike did really well, you know, through the rock garden part and also the big drop off. I didn't feel the shock bottom out or anything like that at all. So in the main downhill part of Grand Central, there's a lot of rock gardens, there's a lot of fast straight sections, there's a couple of small little jumps. You can kind of bunny hop and get some air. There's a lot of drops. There's a little razorback section that you go through, and you can see in the video as well. And I never felt that this bike didn't have enough travel. I do mention several times in the video that I thought this bike only had 140 millimeters travel in the rear, but that's because I looked up the 2018 specs, but it does have 150 in the rear. You're going to hear me say that a couple times in the video. 150 in the rear. It's great. It did a really good job. There was a couple of times here and there where I could feel that back end, jumping around a little bit more than I'm used to, but still, there was plenty of travel on this bike. It ate up that trail really well and did a great job. The bike also did really well in the kind of really tight, there's a couple of tight parts in there where you're going through these little tiny trees, and there's one section where you're going pretty fast, and all of a sudden you got to kind of like slam on your brakes. There's actually two parts like that where you have to slam on your brakes and make a pretty sharp left-hand turn. The first one is kind of like a small rock garden area, but the second one, there's a couple of little, like 1.5 foot little drops where you're kind of off camber a little bit, and the bike did great through that stuff as well. Got some chunk. Woo-hoo-hoo. Bike feels good going downhill. It's absorbing these hits pretty good. Could definitely feel the difference between a 140 back end and a 160 back end though. You feel a little bit more of the chatter. Whew. Just me, thanks guys. It's nice and nimble though. Whew. Oh, came into that section real hot. Not advisable. Did really good job though. The front fork didn't dive at all on me. Nice and nimble getting up in the air. Oh yeah, this bike is fun. So what do I think about this bike? Overall, this bike was a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to riding a Canyon bike. When I found out that they were going to this festival, I was really excited about it. When I got to the festival that morning, I was like a little kid in a candy store. I was probably the first person to their actual tent, and I was just pumped all morning long. I've been really wanting to try and get on a Canyon bike. It's really difficult. They only go to like the major mountain bike festivals where they have actual demos. They don't have like a demo tour in the US. I spoke to somebody at Canyon, and they just started, they have a bus with, or a van full of bikes. They started an East Coast tour. They're going to be starting a West Coast tour pretty soon. But, I was really pumped to try to get on a Canyon bike. I've been wanting to do it for a while. They're very inexpensive. They've got a great track record. I watched the guys on GMBN, they're from Europe, and a lot of them have Canyon bikes and they love them. So I've been, really, really pumped about getting on this bike and doing this review. So the Canyon Spectral, I wasn't sure, you know, how, I didn't know what to expect, basically. And what happened was is that this bike it was really, really good uphill. It did, you know, for a 27.5-inch bike with all of that, you know, front end and rear end travel, this bike did really well uphill. It did great downhill. I didn't notice, you know, I rode this same trail on all of the 4 bikes. You know, I rode this trail on the Spectral. I rode this bike on the Canyon Torque. I also rode the Santa Cruz Hightower. Those other 2 bikes, I'm going to be doing reviews for those as well. But I also rode this trail on my bike. And the Spectral did as good, if not better, than my bike. Because my bike, you know, if you've watched any of my videos, you know my bike it's not the greatest uphill. I love it downhill. This Canyon Spectral did just as good on the downhill section that my Giant Rain did. This bike did everything I wanted it to. Like I said, it was great on the uphill and it's great on the downhill, and that's what I've been looking for as a bike. You know, I can't afford to have, you know, multiple bikes. I'm not going to have a cross-country bike, even though I'm not going to ride cross-country anyways. Who am I kidding, right? I like riding, you know, chunky, gnarly trails. But I want a bike that I can climb hills better than my Rain. And this bike, it did everything I wanted it to. It climbed great. It went down great. It's inexpensive, and you know it's pretty to look at. I'm not so hyped on the color choices. You know, it's either black and gray or like a red and an orange color. The color choices are not so happy about that, but it's a really nice bike to look at, and it was a lot of fun to ride. So if I were to buy this bike, would I have to change anything? There's only a couple of things that I might change. I would definitely try maybe a longer crank, maybe a 170, 175, just depends, you know, how many pedal strikes I have. I don't like pedal strikes, you know, they kind of throw off your rhythm and whatever. The only other thing that I would normally change would be the brakes. Now, I don't like SRAM guide brakes at all. I've tried them on several bikes. They're too progressive for me. You literally have to like grip the crap out of the brakes to slow down really fast. I like XT brakes. That's what I have on my bike. You know, you yank on those and you stop. Now, that being said, these SRAM Guide R brakes that were on the Canyon Spectral were 4-piston brakes. And normally when I ride a bike with guides, the whole time I'm pissed because it takes forever to slow down. These 4-piston SRAM Guide Rs that were on the Canyon Spectral did a great job. I didn't think about it once. Like, you know, like I said, if I'm on a bike with Guide Rs, I'm like, holy crap, I have to like think ahead and slow down because I won't be able to stop as quickly as I can with XT brakes. These SRAM Guide Rs literally did just as good as my XT brakes. I never once thought about how bad or how much I hate SRAM brakes. These SRAM Guide R 4 pistons did a great job. That's my review of the Canyon Spectral. If you like this video, please smash that like button down below. Something else you can do to help me out, comment, subscribe, share these videos. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to grow the channel, and all the help would be greatly appreciated. One thing you can do to help me out would be to check on one of these boxes up in the corners. One's going to take you to a playlist, another one's going to take you to a suggested video. And always you can click on the logo in the center, the Urban Outdoorsman SoCal logo, to subscribe. Thanks a lot.